This is Seymour Rocks reporting from Down Under. It's another example of me reporting on something pretty inconsequential, at least compared with the big issues of the day, like war and peace and the climate change, uh, freight train that's bearing down upon us. But yeah, I got a reply back from Radio New Zealand. I made a complaint about a program that was aired about, I can't remember, 6 to 7 weeks ago on a Saturday morning that gets a lot of viewers. It's the Kim Hill show, or the Saturday morning show, and it followed the whole Me Too trope with Donna Farey kind of coming on air to talk about an issue that happened 30 years ago in California, not even in New Zealand, and there's no suggestion it ever has happened in New Zealand in this particular community, or I'm sure, I mean, sexual abuse is rife. Um, so yeah, I made this complaint because I know something about the history. I've attended uh, um, workshops, believe it or not. Uh, Back in the day, I was a reasonably good um, yoga practitioner and a teacher, and I've attended workshops both with Mr. Iyengar himself when he came to New Zealand and several with Miss Vari. So I know what I'm talking about. So she was basically kind of using all of this to attack Iyengar yoga, and she talked about uh, uh, yeah, an out of date, archaic pedagogy, and she used this. She repeated this quite a few times. Well, I kind of, oh, wait a minute, it's gone. I remember the workshops very well. She certainly didn't use any archaic pedagogy in her teaching. In fact, what we did a lot of was rolling around on balls to kind of bring out our sexual energy, um, and had women walking around pretending to have penises and the like. And this is the woman who's complaining about sexual abuse. Yeah, very interesting. But that's not really my issue. My issue is really about Radio New Zealand and the whole free speech debate, which I'm going to discuss now. So I will now go on to discuss the complaint I made and the response that I got back from Radio New Zealand. So yeah, it was the 4th of May that I listened to an interview on Radio New Zealand with Christchurch-based yoga teacher Donna Farey, in which she was allowed to use the Me Too trope to campaign against the Iyengar yoga movement in New Zealand by using a 30-year-old case from San Francisco to target Iyengar teachers in this country, where there has not, to my knowledge, ever been a single case of abuse. So that was on 4th of May, and it's now the 24th of June, so it's taken them 7 weeks to respond to a simple complaint, and their disingenuous, and I would say Orwellian response indicates to me that they've taken a lot of time to get advice from a very shonky lawyer. This language of their response, which speaks to me of kind of rather dubious legalese rather than bureaucratese. So the response is no longer for me about the case in question. It goes right to the heart of the free speech question. So this is the letter that I wrote to Radio New Zealand. I wish to complain strongly about the interview of yoga teacher Donna Farey by Kim Hill. First, some background. I have in the past been a practitioner of yoga, specifically Iyengar yoga, as well as a teacher, and left the Iyengar scene for my own personal reasons and have not taught for nearly 20 years. I'm aware of the general issues Ms. Fari raised in the interview. I've also known Ms. Fari personally and can attest that she's been saying the same things for about 20 years. The interview was, in my mind, defamatory. She used the words archaic pedagogy and attacked a whole group of people in this country who have never, to my knowledge, ever been implicated in any of the abuse that she is referring to. They, however, will face the brunt of this attack. The issues of abuse, of course, are very real, but go right across the yoga community and indeed the whole New Age movement and need to be addressed. Although the cases are historical and relate to one another, to another time, to an entire generation of baby boomers whose moral standards in the 1970s and 80s can only be referred to as lax. As an American, Ms. Fari should have addressed these issues in an American context rather than on New Zealand media. I also found that it was an attack on others, while at the same time being shamelessly self-regarding and self-promoting. It smacked of collusion and an attack on the opposition. Ms. Fari is, let's face it, not a disinterested party. My main concern is not the viewpoints being presented. Everyone is entitled to their view, but with the decision of Kim Hill's producers in Radio New Zealand to collude with this. The broadcasting standards say quite clearly when controversial issues of public importance are discussed in news, current affairs or factual programs, broadcasters should make reasonable efforts or give reasonable opportunities to present significant points of view, either in the same program or in other programs within the period of current interest. And broadcasters should make reasonable efforts to ensure that news, current affairs and factual programming is accurate in relation to all material points of fact and does not mislead. Given the claims were of a defamatory nature, the very least Radio New Zealand should have done was to give the representatives of the New Zealand Iyengar Yoga Association the right to respond. The very airing of very biased and defamatory comments on public radio without the right of response is wrong. So this is their response. I write, in response to your formal complaint with respect to an interview on Saturday morning on May the 4th with Donna Fari, your complaint suggests that this item was in breach of the accuracy standards, so the following provides a full analysis against these standards and a decision about your complaint is reached. We appreciate you had concerns about the program, but that does not necessarily mean that they were in breach of the formal standards. The accuracy standard requires broadcasters to make reasonable efforts to ensure that news, current affairs and factual programming is accurate in relation to all material points of fact and does not mislead. Guidelines suggest that it is not intended to prevent the publication of material that is clearly distinguishable as analysis, comment or opinion rather than statements of fact. RNZ notes that Ms. Fari's comments were exactly that, i.e. an expression of her comment, analysis of opinion. Therefore, this aspect of your complaint was not upheld. RNZ observes that while you consider some of her statements as defamatory, the formal standards regime cannot resolve matters of defamation. For the record, RNZ does not believe that anyone was defamed in this interview. Yeah, so you go and say that Iyengar yoga is an archaic pedagogy, and you taint the local association with the same brush that she applies to something that happened in America 30 years ago, and that is not defamatory. That's all fair. Yeah, well, I suppose it is when you're following an agenda. If her statements could be construed as statements of fact or even inaccurate facts, that did not affect the thrust of this part of the item, which was an expression of opinion with largely regard to investigation into Manuso Manos, an Iyengar yoga teacher in San Francisco who has been decertified. Your complaint does not detail which facts, if any, were inaccurate. For these reasons, this aspect of your complaint was not upheld. I never said that they were inaccurate. I said it was highly unfair. And what about Radio New Zealand? They're so bloody parochial. You can't even deal with climate change in Antarctica because it's not relevant to New Zealand. So unless it fits their lying agenda, they can't do it because of their rules. And yet here they are. They can talk about something that happened in another bloody country 30 years ago and regard it as of interest to New Zealanders. Balance. With respect to balance, the key requirement is that when a controversial issue of public importance is discussed, the audience is aware of the significant points of view with regard to the topic. It is doubtful with the issue at hand, while newsworthy, it's not newsworthy at all. Well, why is it newsworthy? Falls into the same category as truly controversial topics such as euthanasia and climate change. So it doesn't fit into that. So, you can do whatever you like. A key consideration of the Broadcasting Standards Authority when considering balance complaints is to determine whether the topic has excited a public debate. Well, that's what you're trying to do, isn't it? There is no evidence that the topic of abuse in yoga has reached that level of activity in New Zealand, so on these grounds alone, your complaint could not be taken no further and was not upheld. Well, no thanks to Radio New Zealand, who's trying their best to raise it to a public thing. Other criteria must also be satisfied before the requirement to present significant alternative viewpoints is triggered. The balance standard applies only to news, current affairs, and factual programs which discuss a controversial issue of public importance. Saturday morning is a magazine-style program rather than one of hard news and current affairs. So there is some doubt as to whether the standard applies to this particular interview. Well, I'm sorry, the broadcasting standards apply to everything that's broadcast, not just to whether it's a magazine-style program. The subject matter must be an issue of public importance. Well, why did you broadcast it if it's not a matter of public importance or interest, you fools? It must be controversial and it must be discussed. Previously, the BSA has ruled that an interview can examine a single perspective of a topic if that is how the item is introduced. Not in my mind when it's an attack on another group who are not able to respond. On this occasion, this is what happened, and a discussion did occur as there were no other parties to the interview beside Ms. Fari and the interviewer. That is exactly my point. The point is, they knew that this interview, and they knew what she was going to say, and they should have actually had other parties invited to discuss this with her, but they were not. There is the point too that to censor Ms. Fari would be a breach of the fundamental rights enshrined in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, section 14, which states freedom of expression. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and opinion of any kind in any form. Well, this gets to the nub of it, because nobody was censoring Miss Fari. What I was censoring Radio New Zealand, not Miss Fari. She's quite within her right to believe whatever she damn well likes. But, I mean, I've got opinions on things too. Why can't I come on Radio New Zealand and hold forth? That falls fully in line with freedom of expression. Everyone has the the Human Rights Act. And isn't it interesting how of all this discussion on so-called hate speech and everything else, it's nowhere to be found anywhere in the damn media or anywhere. Nobody has once referenced the freedom of expression, the Human Rights Act with relationship to them, only to the people that they get on their program and love to follow their own agendas. It has been held that an uphold of a formal complaints decision is in and of itself an impingement of the free speech of broadcasters, publishers, and those participating in those broadcasts commonly allude to the chilling effect. Well, the chilling effect comes from you lot! In the instance of these complaints, RNZ notes that the thrust of the item was about the developments about Manuso Manos and Miss Fari's personal experience. Well, who is damn well interested in Miss Fari's personal experiences in San Francisco 30 years ago? Now, what bloody interest is that to the New Zealand public just because Kim Hill is onto this bloody trope? RNZ acknowledges while there would be harm to society in breaching the standards you nominated, there can be a greater harm in the long term of unnecessarily restricting individuals' freedom of speech. Nobody's restricting her freedom of speech. They don't need to broadcast her views, you know, and talk about hate speech. That was hate speech. On this occasion, what was expressed was a reasonably high value of free speech, i.e. speech being criticism of others' behaviour that had been found wanting by his peers. Stifling such speech would lead to a greater harm to society than allowing individuals the right to communicate to the wider public. Well, bollocks to you. Previous decisions by the BSA would suggest that a very high threshold needs to be met before a breach of the standard occurs. That, coupled with the analysis above, indicates that a breach of the standard did not occur in this occasion. In summary then, no aspect of your complaint was upheld. In line with the requirements of the Broadcasting Act, this letter advises you of the reason why your formal complaint was not upheld, and your right, if you wish, to refer this decision for review to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, blah, blah. Well, I'm not referring it to the Broadcasting Standards Authority because it's a complete waste of time. I'm referring it to the Court of Public Opinion. So there's the signature of the arch bureaucrat, George Bignell, Complaints Coordinator. So anyway, I've got a lot more that I could discuss in conjunction with this, but we'll leave it at that. So while Radio New Zealand cites the human rights of a yoga teacher down in Christchurch, other people are being patently denied their rights. New Zealand has had a rational immigration policy based on our own national interests, whether the people are good standing, whether they have skills that are needed. And there's long been an issue that we're bringing in so many people that we're not able to look after them, amongst the refugees. There is a limit to, you can't just bring them in and sort of dump them somewhere. And now all of this is being overturned with well, what I would describe as a UN compact on mass migration, and anything goes. So anybody who's speaking or harks back to what was a very rational immigration policy is now being linked with neo-Nazism, and the only thing that you can talk about is in terms of mass migration. So, for instance, I mean, for as long as I remember, we used to talk about biculturalism and about the Treaty of Waitangi, and it's been very interesting that in the public debate, since all of this has come to the fore, there's very, very little reference to Maori rights under the Treaty of Waitangi. So, and I just have to preface this by saying that I don't really agree necessarily with the politics of these people, but for all the kind of way that they describe things, they're quite real, and this is very real. So this came up in a publication called Politique. The government, the GCSB, has linked a campaign against New Zealand signing up to the UN treaty to neo-Nazi groups based in Austria. The campaign against signing the treaty saw national leader Simon Bridges promise that a national would withdraw New Zealand from the UN Compact on Migration if it became the government. No wonder I couldn't read that sentence, because it doesn't make any sense. Green Party Golriz Garaman revealed the GCSB's discovery yesterday, saying that a parliamentary committee had been briefed on the finding. Foreign Minister Winston Peters, appearing before the committee, confirmed her claim. Peters did not name the group, but the Austrian neo-Nazi Martin Sellner, the leader of Identitäre Bewegung Österreichs, the identitarian movement of Austria, played a leading role in the campaign against the compact there. A report by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which monitors extremism online, found that for months the most shared link on German social media channels was to petition against the UN Pact organised by Sellner. Well, there might be a reason for that. Sellner has told the Austrian public broadcaster ORF that there was an exchange of several messages between himself and the accused Christchurch gunman Brenton Tarrant. So, it's not known whether Tarrant was involved in the New Zealand campaign against the pact, which appears to have been headlined by an obscure right-wing extremist group called Right Minds New Zealand, led by Duva de Boer. Garaman asked Peters to confirm the Austrian connection. I know that in an open hearing of the GCSB Oversight Committee, they informed us that the misinformation campaign about the binding nature and the way that the campaign was supposedly designed to interfere with the immigration policy domestically was started by neo-Nazi groups in Europe. That's exactly what happens. We were never going to stand aside while a bunch of Nazis of a very, very minuscule number in Austria could mount a campaign of disinformation like that and get away with it. And I'm seriously proud of the fact that despite the huge pressure, and I've personally never seen a campaign like it, I've had a few crap campaigns against me in the past, but this was the most vicious, and I decided that we would stick to our guns and out them. It didn't deter us. Well, a lot of people in New Zealand are wondering, it wasn't so long ago, was it? That Winston Peters was being attacked as being anti-migration and racist, and now he's supporting this UN compact of mass migration. If that's not a turnaround, and if that doesn't open him to to attack, then I don't know what does. Peters said that to answer objections raised by National about the compact, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade had obtained legal opinions not only from New Zealand but Britain. National Foreign Affairs spokesman Todd McClay told the committee that National had been concerned about the impact the compact would have on New Zealand's ability to undertake its own immigration settings. That's all a bit rich, given what John Key did, increasing the population by about 500,000 to bring in people that would vote for him. He said that it was only after he raised that question that Peters obtained the legal opinion. The exchange was the only ever slightly jarring note in a marathon 2-hour committee hearing on MFAT, during which both Peters and McClay had frequently talked of their belief in a bipartisan foreign policy, etc., etc. So, yeah, so there we are. Yeah, there's something really stinks about this. But I'm going to leave the final word to this lady. So this lady, Carol Sakey, as you'll see, is quite upset about this issue, and I'm not surprised. You can see from my video that I've also got quite riled up about this.
Hello, Carol Sakey here, Wake Up New Zealand. As many of you know, I actually started this opposition petition against the UN Global Compact in December last year. I put it on Facebook, and it was on for a period of about 13 days, and in that 13 days we got 6,521 signatures. And even now, I mean, at the weekend I asked 10 people if they knew anything about the UN Compact, and they knew nothing. There has been such a silent propaganda machine so that the government can get on, the Labour-led coalition can get on doing what they're doing. Anyhow, David Seymour presented the petition to Parliament in December, on December the 19th. And it was put to the Select Committee. Submissions had to be in by just, I think it was about the 29th of March. However, with the terrible happenings in Christchurch, I felt this would not be appropriate, so I put it off till August, and they agreed upon that. Well, a couple of weeks ago, it came back to me by Jacob Mackay in Parliament that they needed the submissions in by the 24th of June, midday. So a couple of weeks ago, I hurriedly started making my submissions to actually send to them, and I put them in fast courier post to arrive in Wellington at the Select Committee by Thursday morning. Okay, Friday morning, Politic is an independent, no sponsored, no corporate ownership media. It's a parliamentary media that goes out to social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter. Well, this report, this media report, was found on Facebook on the Friday, the day after those submissions would have been received. And what it says is that it actually publicises that the campaigners against the UN Compact in New Zealand had some link and connection to neo-Nazi groups in Austria. I was absolutely blown away. I could not believe it. They even linked it to Tarrant. Now, the thing is, Peters doesn't name who is connected here. It was Gluritz, the Green Party, that started this off, and Peters confirms it. And it was actually mentioned in Parliament and to the committee. So, let's make things right. Anyone who actually campaigned for that, and that includes 6,521 signatures, are all supposedly linked to Tarrant and the neo-Nazi group. Martin Stelner, I believe his name is, who I've never heard of before. Anything to stain this campaign against the UN Global Compact of Migration.
So there we are. I'll leave the link to this down below. Now, does this lady look at all like a neo-Nazi to you, or even the dupe of neo-Nazis? So it's the double standard that really gets to me, because Radio New Zealand can get on this woman who, on the Me Too trope, which is in fashion, only because it's pushed by the media mostly, and yet this is something that people can't even talk about, and we're just being sort of told little dribs and drabs, and it's all a fait accompli. There's no discussion about it. And while I'm at it, there's the whole thing about the New Zealand flag has raised its ugly head, with John Key saying that if he could do it all again, he wouldn't have done a referendum, he would have just changed the flag. And I think there's a real reason for that, because we are ruled. Maori signed the Treaty of Waitangi, an agreement that was signed with the British Crown. Now that relationship is represented by the New Zealand flag, which still has the Union Jack. And by getting rid of that and introducing a new flag, it's very easy for them to dismantle the whole structure that has been with us for so many years, and to bring in instead something like this UN pact on mass migration. And I've never heard any of these people, and I don't think that Carol even would be one of them, who says we don't want these people and they should be chucked out. Now that would be neo-Nazi if they were saying that, but they're not. They're just ordinary New Zealanders who are concerned about themselves, their children and their grandchildren, and they see their lives just being destroyed with every day. So I mean, it's a no-brainer to say, if we can't look after the people that we already have in this country, if we've got an increasing number of people living under bridges, how are we going to be looking after an increased number of people? And they're not sort of saying, well, we need to increase our quota of refugees. I mean, I would be all in favour of that. But this is of mass migration, uncontrolled, in a way that we've seen in Europe, and it's being foisted on the New Zealand public. So I could go on this for quite a while, especially if I was perhaps in discussion with somebody else, but that's enough from me. This is Seymour Rocks from Down Under.